If you'll excuse me, I'm going to drop my mask down so you can hear me better. How's that? All right. Yeah, I'll try not to breathe too hard. It's getting harder to do that, too. I want to welcome everybody that's here tonight. This is our first meeting since last February of 2020, so that's over a year and a half ago. I hope you all watched the programs on YouTube for the last season. Had some pretty good ones. Most of the people that gave those presentations said they wouldn't do it on Zoom again. They did not like that, not being able to see people and, you know, kind of see how it was going. Well, what has changed since we last met? We have a new vice president, and Kim's still on the board, but Fred has volunteered to become the next vice president. I got to have somebody just in case. So there's Fred right there. He's yeah. So yeah, like I say, not much else has changed. We still have our office in the basement of the old brick courthouse building, the Richards building on East Street. That museum is complete. Was completed last year, just in time for nobody to go into it. So it's 2 floors of drawings and by Helen Logie, and it's fantastic work, and I don't know if anybody will ever get to see him for the next few years until this all settles. The only other thing that I have is that the museum's still going strong. Everybody's still got things going on in the local area, which is a big improvement over, say, just a couple months ago. So I don't have much more to report.
You want to say we lost Jure?
Yes. Oh, yeah. For those who don't know, Jure retired at the end of last season, last February. She had done it for over 20 years that I know of. And so she retired, and we made a decision as a board not to serve food and drink here. And I didn't realize how important it was to the museum to continue that. So, like I say, we'll have cookies set out for you, so you can take one home tonight. And Carol's having a good time down in the East Seattle area, I think, over on the east side, in her retirement. And so everybody's kind of happy there. One more thing. Drew Watley, he's in the back of the room. He's the one that did all the work for the presentations online, and he's going to continue that here. He's going to be doing films for all of us on the programs, and so I want to thank Drew. Thank you. There's also, he was reminded me about the photo contest downstairs. This is the 100th anniversary of the Charlie Chaplin film at the old Beck Theater. And so, or actually, I guess it was the American Theater, or was it earlier than that? I think it was earlier than that. This is Charlie Chaplin. Oh, okay, the Reveille. Okay, yeah. Anyhow, we'll, whatever theater it was. So you can go down and you can put a mustache on and get your picture taken in front of a green screen. Huh? Sounds good? All right. So my favorite topic and my interest lies in the earlier part of the life of the settlers on Bellingham Bay. They started coming here in the 1840s. Actually, there was a Hudson Bay Company outpost at the headwaters of 10 Mile Creek in 1830s. Before that, there were instances where the British were fishing, trapping salmon at Point Roberts, and there were a number of other explorers coming through the area. In 1841, of course, we had the Wilkes expedition here. In 1848, there were a couple other people showed up. Blanket Bill Jarman was one. And so off and on, we had a bunch of early settlers there. Well, before that even, there was a group of people here, the natives. They'd started arriving here. There are actually campsites and village sites that have been dated back 5,000 years in Whatcom County. So they were here right after the retreat of the last ice age, and they've made it their home here ever since. Now, I put in the beginning, of course, I'm not trying to be, but anyhow, this is what the natives had as far as the Salish Sea people. This was the majority or the major tribes in the area. We had quite a few major tribes here. The largest one in Whatcom County were the Nooksacks. They had 8 large villages here with several hundred natives in each one. They were permanent sites. They were inland, and they also controlled the waterways on this side of the Sound. They were quite powerful. They made friends with the other tribes. There was never any warfare between them and the other tribes. The Lummies, they lived on the islands. They slowly migrated over to where they're at now because of conflict with other natives like the Haida coming down south. And they pretty much kind of held their own there at the end. Unfortunately, when Captain Vancouver was sailing through these seas in 1792, a third of the villages he went to were empty, smallpox. There's a story about one of them up in the fort in the interior of BC. The trappers were in a fort. Hundreds of natives showed up to get help because they were dying of smallpox, and there was nothing they could do. And they wrote a pretty good story about that. And so it was quite prevalent here. They, of course, lived in pretty nice conditions. That's a longhouse behind the guy with the boat. This was taken about 1905. It's from a tribe, the Nisqually tribe. And he's got a seagoing canoe there carved out of a cedar log, and that's what they used to get about. Another gentleman by the name of Swan, he was really involved with the natives here, and he talks about traveling in one of these canoes in rough water. So J.G. Swan. So if you look at the longhouse, you'll see the ports are vertical. They build a framework and then they attach the sides vertically. And that's a pretty distinguishing thing for up in here. This is Chief Chowitsit was here when the first white settlers showed up, and he's the one that gave them permission to build the first sawmill here. They actually helped the white guys build it. And this was his post, identifying him as a chief, or one of the chiefs of the Lummies. And they were quite intermingled with the whites here for a long time, and a lot of them now carry white man names, or their surnames. There was a lot of intermarriage between the two. They never really messed with any of the white folks. We didn't mess with them. And but there are instances that happened. A lot of the women that married white men were abandoned later on, and things like that went on. The first white explorers came up the coast in 1690s. Juan de Fuca the imaginary captain of the Spanish ship, who was Greek, and I won't attempt to pronounce his real name, but he was instrumental in coming into the mouth of the straits, and he proceeded in quite far. He landed on Vancouver Island to supply with fresh water and things like that, and he talks about it. And then, of course, at the mouth of the San Juan de Fuca, there is a monument. It's a stone rock out of the water that he describes with great detail. And so it wasn't a farce, and he actually was here. In fact, this is a map that was printed in 1780, and here's the Straits of Juan de Fuca, mapped out. And so you see that even the Spanish were saying, okay, you did right. In 1792, there were two small vessels of the Spanish, and they came into the Bahia de Gaston, the Bellingham Bay. And that name remained with the upper part of this bay up until the 1860s. So the upper part of the Bellingham Bay still held that Spanish name on it for a long time. This was their survey map of the bay. When Vancouver's men came in, Baker came in on his boat. They had run aground during low tide, both the Spanish ships, and so they had to wait to high tide to float out. They witnessed the eruption of Mount Baker at that time. That was in July of 1792. Of course, the British kind of took over from the Spanish. There was an incident where the Spanish took English ships and put them in chains and things like that, and so they settled it without a war. But of course, the British won. They took over everything. Well, then when the Americans got going, they said, hey, wait a minute, this is our continent, not yours. And so there was a dispute which was settled by a treaty in 1818 with everybody would cohabit this area. And then in 1848, we took it over up to the 49th parallel. But you'll see to the right, from the Rocky Mountains clear to Hudson Bay, it was called Rupert's Land. Prince Rupert had financed the Hudson Bay Company, and they gave him the rights to all that land, all the way to the west coast. Vancouver Island was made a colony of Great Britain in around 1830. And then in 1833, or 1840s, they moved Fort Vancouver up, and it became Fort Victoria. The earliest known building in existence today in Washington State, the earliest existing building, is the granary at Fort Nisqually. However, it's not the oldest building on its original foundation because the fort was moved. It was up down on the lowlands and swampy areas, so they moved it up on the hill, and it's now down in Tacoma, on the outskirts. So the building's been moved, which makes Pickett House the oldest building on its original foundation in Washington State. Now there was a family that was living in Bellingham Bay when Roeder and Peabody showed up in 1852 in December. As soon as they helped build the mill, they took off for Canada because there was too many people here. So the first kind of permanent settler that was here was a man by the name of Alonzo Poe. This is the only known picture of him. Well, there's actually one more, but it's very fuzzy. And so Poe had come into Washington Territory, which was Oregon Territory at the time, in 1845, and helped found the settlements in Thurston County. He was actually one of the county officers and did a lot of work down there. he was became the sheriff, and then he was the auditor and the assessor, and different jobs. They all took turns. And he moved up here. He was here in August of 1852, and he was at Poe's Point as he had this ad in September 1st in the Columbia newspaper, which was the first newspaper in Washington state, well, actually in the northern part of the Oregon Territory. So he's had his town site down in Olympia for sale. Here he is on September 5th, 4 days later, and he's got a property for sale still down there, but he's at Poe's Point. Oh, Port Townsend touching at Poe's Point. That's Poe's Point was down in present-day Fairhaven. So he's up here then. In August 10th, he becomes the representative for the Columbia newspaper up here at Bellingham Bay. Oh yes, Henry Roeder. By the way, Poe was 24 years old when he came up here. So that meant he was about 17 when he first came to Washington Territory. Henry Roeder, when he got here, he was 24. He comes over on a canoe, in an Indian canoe with Lummies paddling it from Port Townsend. Interesting story about him and Russell Peabody, his partner. They show up at Port Townsend. They're looking for a way to find a waterfall near salt water. So one of the other guys shows up and says, "Oh yeah, I got one. I'll give me $1,000. I'll take you to it." And he was talking about Whatcom Falls, and the guy that ran this store there at Port Townsend said, the natives were over there at the time. He says, "Give those natives, some money, and they'll take you." That's what they did. There were about 6 white men in that boat. Barnes and a few of his partners. They had come down from the Queen Charlotte's after getting run off by the natives up there. They were gold miners. They came in the canoe with them. There was a couple other men that came later that might have been in that canoe too. So there was about a half a dozen, or between 6 and 8 white men in that canoe when it got here. Here's Russell Peabody. He was the oldest guy. He was, what is it here? I got him, well, he was, no, he was only, he's 24 years old. And I don't know, these pictures were taken sometime about that, maybe just before they had left California. The two of them were partnered down there during the gold rush, and they couldn't make any money doing gold, so they decided to work as they did salmon fishing and things. And then when the California put laws on the salmon fishery, then they moved up here to open a sawmill. San Francisco had burned for the 5th time, and wood was selling for $100 per thousand or something like that, which was about 10 times what it was selling before. Here was their partner. They had a partner. He's not very well written up in the books. A couple of people mention him. This is Henry Brown. Now, he'll play an important part later on in the history of the West, but he was a partner in the sawmill. Well, he left later, probably within the first 2 years, went to California, made a fortune, went up to Denver, bought the site of the city, donated the land for the capital, and in 1890 he built Brown's Palace, one of the richest hotels in the country. And no, his wife wasn't on the Titanic, Molly. In 1854, gold was found on the west or east side of the bay, and Edmund Fitzhugh showed up to be the superintendent of that coal mine. I'm sorry, it was coal, not gold. And So he was here for a number of years, and then he left in 1863 to go fight for the South. He was from Virginia. He was a gentleman and aristocratic type of person. He actually was one of the Superior Court judges for a while he was here. He married a native woman whose father was Seaholm, and so they named the mine the Seaholm Mine, and the town. He killed a man in self-defense, and then of course he had issues with some of the other people in town, and he always won judgments against him because he was the judge. Here's a 1854 survey that was done by the U.S. of Bellingham Bay. Here's the mouth of Squalicum. Here's Whatcom. That's the colony dock. The map was updated in 1890s, so that's here's Seaholm along here. There's the coal mine dock, and here's the Seaholm dock. Here's Fairhaven. Here's Poe's Point. That's no longer there. It's buried under tons of rock when they moved the hill out. 1854. In 1854, the survey ship Active showed up. James Alden was aboard. He would later become an admiral in the Navy. This is what it looked like here. He drew a picture of what it looked like, probably right along the shoreline. He also drew a picture of Whatcom in 1854, August 10th. I don't know what this, I'm sorry. This is a ship covered in something. I'm really not sure what's going on there. Probably a bunch of canvas to keep the rainwater out. Here's a house being built. Now, if you notice, this house has horizontal siding on it, so it's being built by a white man. Here's another white man house. Here is a vertical sided building. It's probably one of the longhouses that were at the mouth of Whatcom Creek. This was done right at the mouth on the west shore. This is a sawmill. It was completed in 1853 in the summer. The creek was too dry, couldn't use it. It never made money. It was always in receivership. Henry Roeder bought it back about 4 times out of receivership. It never made money. It finally burned in 1873, and nobody cried. So the back of the mill here is shown at a different view than what it would have been because the back faced the bluff above it. So it sat right at the mouth of the creek and upstream of the high water mark, just a little bit. It had a mill race coming off the top of the creek, running down into the back, which drove the belts to run the saw. It was a circular saw, and most of the saws that were made at that time were just a straight blade running up and down. This actually went around and around. Okay. In the back is another longhouse. It could have been the same one in the other picture from a different angle. 1854, they drew a picture of Mount Baker from the bay. Right here is the town of Seaholm. The dock is here. Earliest known drawing, picture. In 1856, Henry Roeder was down in Chuckanut Drive, or not on Drive, but in the bay, and he looked up and he said, oh, there's a big bluff of rock. He saw it was Sandstone. 1856, he started mining it and opening a quarry. Now, the quarry first opened was where the Yacht Club Point is near the south end of the bay. That was the first when he opened. Then he moved north up to where it is now, just south of Brickyard Point. So you see the equipment they used. They would go up, and all of the seams of the layers of sandstone were almost vertical on this face. And so what they would do is they'd go up and they'd drill holes and set charges, and they would just slide the chunks down in layers. And so they were able to get it down on the ground where they could work with it. And we go into detail a little bit about that. One of the first things they built was this platform for the Race Rocks Lighthouse on Vancouver Island. The second one was for the Dungeness Spit Lighthouse at the end of Dungeness Spit over by Port Angeles. And this is the Dungeness Spit Lighthouse. It was quite high, 90-some feet high. A few years later, they took 20 feet off the top because it was reflecting off the water at such an angle that the ships would get confused as to which one was the actual light. And Deb and I walked out there. It's about, what is it? I don't know, 3 or 4 miles out along the spit to get to it, along the beach. I actually went up in it. That was, I don't know, kind of neat. Another thing that was built in the 1860s was the dry dock at Esquimalt for the British Navy over in Vancouver Island. In the 1870s, the foundation and some of the trim on the government building at Portland was built. 1867 to 1871 it took. And that building is still there today. And the state capitol in 1905 in Olympia was built from it. And it's still there today. It's now the head office for the state school offices. And of course, our at-home building, the Roth Block, was built in 1890. Charles Roth was Henry Roeder's son-in-law, and he took over the business in 1890. And then in 1900, when things started to turn into cement instead of stone, he gave it back to Henry's son, Victor. This was taken in 2004. Here's the quarry in 2004. You can see the drill marks on the walls of the quarry today. You can still see those. In 1901, Great Northern took the line from up on the hill to run it along the water, and of course it ran right through the quarry. And there was a lawsuit, the longest lawsuit in Washington state history up to the time. And they wanted to give him $60,000 to pay for the interference of the quarry work, and also where they would take up part of the quarry. And they sued, and they won $85,000. By the time it was settled, Henry had died, and Roth got the money. In 1856, we had a lot of native problems. The Haida were coming down and raiding, pillaging villages, killing everybody, taking slaves back. They were mostly from the Queen Charlottes, and they did that on an annual basis. And so at that same time, there was some problems with the Indians on the east side. There was the Whitman Massacre occurred about that time, and other things going on with the natives. The gold miners were up in Okanagan and different places, Yakima area, and they were running the Indians off, and of course then there started a war. So in 1856, Captain George Pickett showed up with 60 men, and they started to set up here to protect the settlers. This is an 1868 drawing of the Fort Bellingham layout, and it was 208 feet on a side, so it was an acre, and it was there were 2 blockhouses. Oh, this is one of them. This one was there until 1890s, the mid-1890s, when it burned. It either burned from a forest fire, which we had back then here, or a hobo got in there and set fire to it. We don't know. I don't know which one is the truth. This was the Pickett House. This picture was taken in 1907, and that's Hattie, the person who was given permit to live there for the rest of her life. She was a housemaid for one of the other owners. And you see that today now, of course, there's a front porch on that instead of an under porch, open porch. So in Bellingham Bay in 1858, you had a number of fishing villages. Fort Bellingham is about 3 miles out from town. The territorial courthouse, which this is an updated map too. The Peabody Mill right here at the mouth of the creek, the Seaholm coal mine, and Paddle's mine. Now Paddle had come in here in 1852 and he had dug a hole in the ground, which they got coal out of. He operated it for about 3 years, but the coal was so bad the ships couldn't run on it because it was fueling the military ships that were coming in here. And so he finally gave it up, and then it was bought out by other people and eventually just shut down. And a few years ago, they actually found the opening to this coal mine, and it was just south of the, or just north, just right next to Reed Boiler Works down there on the south side. It took them quite a while. They had to fill the thing full of grout and whatnot so they could build over the top of it. And for years, one of the tanks for the Standard Oil Company sat right on top of the opening. 1858, April, first ship shows up. It's got 450 miners on it from California because they'd heard about gold coming out of the Upper Fraser River. By June, there was about 10,000 people living along the shores of Bellingham Bay, waiting to go north up to the gold fields. This is the map of the gold fields. They're all in Canada. The big ones were up in here along the Thompson River and in this area here. Now, you see this little line here that comes off and goes up to Hope. That's the one that came from Bellingham Bay and went up to meet the river at Hope. That trail was finished in August, about the time that the gold started giving out, number one. Number two, there were other issues, and I'll talk about those. This is the Thompson River. This is a French newspaper article that was printed in 1858. It shows they actually moved the river over, and they're sluicing the riverbed here. Pretty energetic. June of 1858, surveyor ship comes in. One of the men on board draws a picture of Whatcom City. Okay, there's about, like I say, 10,000 people living here, and you can see they're living in tents, shacks, whatever else they could find. Whoop, I'm sorry. Okay. No, I gotta use, okay. This is the Pickett House. This is where F Street goes up now. So you get an idea of the layout. The shoreline's curving in to go into the mouth of Whatcom Creek. There was a pretty good sized little bay there.
The square thing in the middle, that's the Richardson building?
The what?
The square building in the middle with the offset doors, is that the
Oh, no, I'm not sure. I'd have no idea what these buildings represent because most of them were taken down after the end of the gold rush. My assumption is that right in here along the shoreline is where the brick building was going to be built a month later. I have a thing to read. June 1858. This was in the Northern Light newspaper, which was here for about 2 months. The area around the bay had an estimated 10,000 people camped along the beach, in shacks and tents, even on rafts in the tide flats. People were setting tents up in Roeder's yard, and there were others setting up housekeeping in the streets. No actual count of the population was done. An estimate of the number of passengers on the ships arriving totaled around 10 to 12,000. Whatcom had 12 grocery stores, 1 hardware store, 5 clothing and shoe stores, 5 variety stores, 2 dry goods stores, 2 drug stores, 1 stationery store, 3 metalworking shops, 3 blacksmiths, 1 gunsmith, 3 hotels, 8 restaurants, 2 butchers, 3 bakers, 12 saloons, 8 doctors, 4 lawyers, 3 express offices, 2 real estate agencies, 3 drays, and a printing office. That was in 1858. The post office had over 100 boxes. There were 80 houses and over 130 tents. Okay. An ad for the Metropolitan Hotel here, the Metropolitan. This was an ad in the Alta, which was the newspaper in San Francisco at the time. Come to Bellingham. Get on a ship, come to Bellingham. Bellingham Bay, the Santa Cruz. There's a listing of ships that came in here. It was amazing. One week there were 4,000 people showed up here in 1 week on ships. So the bay was full of ships dropping off miners and all of the followers. Here's another list of ships coming up here. Just up in Victoria. Fort Victoria had 300 people living in it in 1858, the beginning. In 1862, they were the second largest city on the West Coast with 30,000 people, all because of this. In May of 1858, the first plat of Seaholm was done. This is now the main street in town. So that you got State Street there, and then of course all the other streets. That was all completely redone in 1883, the plat. In July 4th, 1858, this plat came out. It's a plat of Whatcom, although lots were already being sold as the markers went up. To give you an idea of where we're at, I'm sorry, right here is the brick building. They believed they were going to fill in the bay. Well, they finally did. Of course, if you see, all the streets are lettered and numbered. At this time, there were no names used. 1883, this plat was completely redone. And then in August, Sunday, August 8th, this is written at San Francisco. 300 passengers returned, no gold. The river was high up through this period of time, the Fraser River. Nobody could get up the river unless they hiked all the way up 100 miles. So what happens is, of course, nobody could get up there. And by that time, the gold was being worked out. They started returning. However, in 1859, the Caribou Gold Rush started. So a large number, thousands of them, stayed and went north another 50 miles or so. This was Fort Victoria in 1857. It's got the stockade and a few wooden buildings in it. Well, That didn't last long. It became just plain Victoria after a while. It was a huge city. In 1858, this is from September, Governor Douglas of the HBC company up there decided that there were too many people going up without any guidance or anybody to keep track of them. Because like I say, there were 300 Hudson Bay Company people here and about 30,000 people up there. So most of them from the U.S. There were fears in the British councils in London about the number of foreigners that were in BC and how if they wanted to, they could take it. So they issued a license. They had to be, it was required by anybody going up the river. They paid $5 for it. It was good for 3 months. Anybody that showed up without it was brought back. And I don't know if you can see that, but right down here, it says 25 feet or all river claims, or on all river claims. They only got 25 feet of a riverbed to work. Not like today, you get 600 feet in a claim. July 17th, that's a good day, isn't it, dear? It's my birthday. Ann Perry shows up with a load of bricks for the old courthouse building. And here it is, she's dropping off the bricks. This was done by Steve Mayo, watercolor. Nice. It's got pictures of the natives in their canoes, and then of course the people going out to see the ship. The shoreline is covered with thousands of buildings. He did all this with a one-hair camel brush. In 1860, 2 years later, this is it. Everybody left. They took most of the buildings with them, almost everything but the brick courthouse was moved. 1860 census listed 77 men, women, and children living in the Whatcom precinct. Seahome had 80 residents, including 35 coal mine workers. I actually counted it, and there were 41. The Semiahmoo precinct had 48 people, including 34 personnel with the border survey. The San Juan Island precinct had 68 residents and 80 military personnel, because by that time the pig war was going on. Big drop from 10,000. Speaking of the survey, 1858 it started on the west side of Point Roberts, and it continued east all the way to the Rocky Mountains. So here's the camp in Sumas Prairie. So they're just getting ready to make the climb up over the mountain ridges. There were about 40 men there, including a group of soldiers, and the supplies all came from Whatcom, which kept the town alive. Actually, they supplied this expedition with all of what they needed. I think the horses were going for $200 a piece because they kept wearing them out. This is monument number 1. It's on the west side of Point Roberts. You ever got up there to see it? It's got all the information on it about who did what, and it was put in place in 1861. At that point, if you ever go over there, you're only about 10 feet from the Canadian line, actually, because there's a hedgerow on the north side of this you can't go through. If you walk back about 10 feet, you can step over a yellow curb, and you're in Canada. There's no fence, nothing. Good luck. 1859, oh my, Cutler shot a pig. It happened to be on Hudson Bay Company farm over on San Juan Island. And this was the farm, Bellevue Farm. This picture was taken in 1857, 2 years before the incident. It was occupied by both British and American forces, and it would be about 15 years before it was settled. And Kaiser of Germany actually voted that the island was on the U.S. side. Here's the Active, the survey ship Active, which had cannon aboard just in case, and they're bringing supplies into the American side of the island. There's the one of the blockhouses from the Fort Bellingham that were taken over. Ran across this picture just a month ago. This is what's left of the American fort, which is the officers' quarters. There was probably at some point the lumber for this might have come from the mill at Whatcom. It's hard to tell. 1859, when Pickett was in charge of putting the military road through from Fort Bellingham down to Fort Nisqually, he stopped and drew a picture of downtown Seaholm, the big city there. This is the buildings that were in town. So you can see what was going on in 1859. Not much. That was only a year after the gold rush. 1861, they built the first public schoolhouse in Whatcom County. There was a school in Whatcom across the street from the brick courthouse. It had been the office of the Northern White and Light newspaper, but Edward Eldridge taught classes for groups of people there for a while as something, way to make money. And that was right around the 1860s, so just before this. But this was the first public building. It also served as a church and a meeting hall. It was torn down in 1891 or 2 when they built put the Chestnut Street through. Yes?
The siding on that is perpendicular. Was it native built?
No, it was not. There was, it differed between whoever built it. It might have had natives help build it. I don't know. There's no real record of it being built, so we just know when it was up. But that's what a native home would have looked like also. They all looked like that when the first explorers went into Nootka Sound. This is what the village looked like, all the houses. Yeah, board and batten. Yeah. In 1869, there was another drawing that was done. This was in Harper's Magazine, accomplishing an article about the first men to climb Mount Baker. And one of the men was Coleman. The Coleman Glacier is named after. Coleman was actually from Victoria. There was 4 of them came up, and 2 of them were from Canada. Went up. And they didn't summit on the top the first time. They missed it because of the snow. So they went back up a couple years later, and they actually got on top of the true summit. This is a first known picture of what you might call Whatcom. 1873. Now, in this picture, you can see the white building. That was the Northern Light building. It was built during the gold rush, and that's where the newspaper was printed. And then later on, it became a meeting hall, and then also a real estate office, and the first, what was a private school. This is the courthouse. And if you can see that, then they got the East Street dock. Now, when this picture was taken, it was already in disarray. If you look, I don't know how many of you can see the piling, the boards holding the wall up. The water was undercutting the surface, the bottom of the building, so they had to put support beams up to keep the wall from collapsing. That was to prove a problem all the way through its history up until recently. This is the Whatcom Hotel. So the boardwalk came around, it went off. You can see the boardwalk here, it went over to the hotel. So, in the middle of whatever day, you go over there and have lunch, and maybe a beer or 2 or whatever. These buildings I know nothing about. There's Pickett House. This is the office for the sawmill. Now, this picture was taken, I think, before the fire that burnt the sawmill, 1873. But you can't see the creek, so I don't know for sure. It might have been one of these buildings here. There's no way to tell. This was the main part of town, and that was on Division Street, which is the main street through town. It ran from the water up the hill. This is another picture taken in 1873, and it shows more of the town buildings. And it's right on the water, right on the sand, gravel. This is the Undine. That's one of Henry Roeder's ships. So the guy stood up where the mill office was and took a picture of the whole area of Whatcom. (1878). There was a big to-do here during the 4th of July. So almost everybody that lived on Bellingham Bay is in this picture. And in 1920 or so, Lottie Roth, Roeder's daughter, actually put the numbers on. You can see the numbers here, and put down on the back of the picture the names of the people that were there. And most of the people are named. The reason we know it was the date it is, one of the sons of, I think, Henry Roeder's oldest son, who got killed, he was fell off a horse and died, is in this picture, so we know it's just before that happened. There's another picture, 1883, of down to Whatcom. Now, by that time, they had built the Colony Mill at the mouth of the creek. The first mill burned in 1873, and this took place in 1883, 10 years later. The Peabody died in 1867, and he left his, he had combined, him and Roeder combined their properties, and it left it in such a mess. He had a family back east, and then he married a native woman here. And he died in California in 1867, and the whole estate was all messed up for about 15 years. So nothing really got done. In 1881, they got a colony from Kansas to come up, a group of people, and they built this mill in 1883 in spite of the problems with the paperwork for the property. And of course, they had almost settled all of these complaints and problems with that property. And then when they saw that the mill was making money and more people were moving in, then it went for another 2 years. So here's Holly Street, which it was called 13th at the time. It ended at the dock. It didn't come through the bay, through the mouth, past the mouth of the creek for quite a while. 1888, I think. This is the first bank building in Whatcom County. The first bank was actually in the Whatcom Hotel. And it's sitting where the Chuckanut Brewery is today. This picture was taken in 1884, just a year later, and this is the main street. This is Division Street running through. There's the bank building. There's over here is Seahome. And you can see a faint line going down, and that's the railroad tracks they were building to put in the British Columbia and Bellingham Bay Railroad. Northern Pacific was supposed to have come up in 1874. It was canceled because of war in Europe. So then by 1880s, they're coming in. They're going to go to Tacoma first. And so Seattle and Bellingham both built their own railroad systems. So a few months after this picture was taken, all of these buildings burned. So there was just rubble left for the Whatcom. This picture was taken a year later, around a year later, mid-1880s. Here's the courthouse building, and it's still on docks. You see the Holly, or the 13th Street there is raised up on pilings, and it ends back here. There's Seahome again. Now, in 1889, Seahome is going to become New Whatcom. He still got Old Whatcom, then he got New Whatcom, and a year later they vote to get together and become New Whatcom. Cornwall owned all the property over there on that side of the bay. He owned 3,000 acres. He was a guy that had run the coal mine for a while. And he kept the property after the mine closed in 1878. So he decided that Seaholm wasn't a name that would draw people to it. So he named it New Whatcom. And it did. It drew a few people. Here's the mouth of the creek today. This is where the original mill sat, just up off this, what this bluff is here. The colliery mill was right on this piece of property. It might have overlapped a little bit. This is the colony mill dock. The timbers, or the piling's still there in the creek as you go there to take a look. By 1886, everybody knew that this was going to be a very prosperous place to be. The railroad was coming west. It had arrived at Tacoma. 1886, the Bellingham Bay Railroad was under construction. The Canadians were driving the Canadian Pacific over the Rocky Mountains, and everybody was looking nothing but up. Lots were selling for several $100s a piece here. From 1888 until 1893, when the Depression hit, the first big one, there were buildings going up day and night, sidewalks being put in, all the utilities put in. And sometimes they would sit there and blow the sandstone blocks out of the way, and it would shatter windows downtown, so we had several glaciers in town. It was a going concert. That's C Street. It went all the way up to the top of the hill. The Revenue newspaper office is right here. This was on pilings, of course, and the buildings were on both sides. And of course, now there's no street runs through there. It just ends right at the foot of the hill. This is 13th. Now, 13, the number 13, does that say anything to you? Yeah, no. In 1905, the people that lived along there couldn't sell property. Said, hey, let's do something here. So they changed the name to Holly Street. Yes, Jackie?
I believe the reason they did it was that was the year that Fairhaven and Whatcom consolidated. Fairhaven also had a number of streets.
Okay, yeah. That's right. Whatever reason it was, they changed it. Yeah. It was already up in New Whatcom. That area between New Whatcom, which is right there at the top of the hill, as you're going east on Holly Street, you kind of go up past the Oakland Block to get up to Prospect. There was nothing there for many years, and then it was finally platted in about 1886, and that's when it became, a connection. So poor old Seaholm, where'd it happen to it? It hasn't been in pictures since, 1859. There are no photographs known of the street here. We're looking up State Street, which was called Elk Street at the time. And so here's the offices of the coal mine. Here's the dumps from the coal mine. Here's the school. Here is the railroad tracks for the BB and BC. It says 1888. The picture was actually taken sometime around 1886. Up here is Morse Hardware. Here's the offices of the Bellingham Bay Improvement Company. Orchard Place, and that's still called Orchard Place today. There's a bunch of apartments up there, condos, or whatever. So this was going to be the main street in Seaholm, and by, of course, 1895, it was all the way up to, and starting to go up the hill there, south end of the main drag, and it was the main street of New Whatcom. In 1892, of course, both towns were New Whatcom, and they merged. They had merged, and then, of course, they built this building in 1892 as the City Hall. In 1901, they merged, well, in 1901, it was New Whatcom, and then the state, the politicians decided they didn't like New Whatcom. They changed the name back to Whatcom. And then in 1904, in January, it became Bellingham. Because Whatcom and Fairhaven merged. And it wasn't because Fairhaven wanted to merge, but there was more voters in Whatcom. So, yeah, right in here. This is 4th Street going down here. It's still there today, too. By the way, the railroad tracks ended at Chestnut for several years. There was no rolling stock to be had. They didn't have enough money to finish it. But in 1890, it was the first railroad to reach the crossing at Sumas, ahead of the Seattle and Eastern, Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad by a month. So they had the first train depot in Whatcom County right at the border, and the other company had to build theirs behind that. You know how it was. And then, of course, by, just a few years later, there were hundreds of homes and buildings here. It was amazing that when the railroads came here, we had 4 intercontinental railroads here at one time, servicing this area by 1905. They all merged in the middle of downtown Cedar Woolley. All the tracks are still there, kind of coming together. Pretty neat. So that's all I've got. I will put out another one continuing from this part of the history at a later date. So thank you. Now, next month's meeting is going to be on November 11th. So what we decided to do is to go ahead and have some veterans come and talk about their experiences in the military. So I hope you all show up for that. Thank you.
Wes, do you want to announce about the membership change?
By the way, the board is met in the back of the room tonight. Actually, we talked about it at the last board meeting. Dues are not due until the end of the season in April. So for the next season, then dues will be due again. Thank you.
Because of moving to the electronic newsletter, we don't have a way to give you a label that says when memberships will expire. So everybody's membership will expire at the end of our program season, at the end of April, and the new season will begin May. So anytime you pay May through that season is when your membership will carry through the end of April.
And if you paid $25, you will get a journal this year. They'll be out in December.
Is there still going to be a newsletter?
Yes,
Yes.
electronic.
Yeah, it's yeah. You go, yeah, give her your, if you're not getting the newsletter by email, give your email to the back desk there, please. Any questions? Comments? Thank you for coming.